And we are recording.
Excellent.
So thank you everybody for attending today. My name is Annie Gaines. I am the Continuing Education Consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. Welcome to today's session on Wi-Fi content filtering featuring our lovely broadband consultant, Dylan Baker. We are recording this session so that others can view it. And anyone that registered for this session will receive an email with a link to this. And we've muted all attendees that are in this chat, but feel free to use the chat box to communicate with us or ask questions. And on behalf of the Idaho Commission for Libraries and our funding partner, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, it's our pleasure to bring to you this webinar, and my pleasure to introduce Dylan.
Thank you, Annie. That's great to be here. Thank you all who have shown up for this Info2Go. A super thrilling topic. I mean, I just really cannot, I can't, I know the excitement must be palatable to hear all about Wi-Fi content filtering. But this is hopefully useful information, and this will be recorded as Annie was mentioning. So if if someone missed out on this great opportunity live, you'll still be able to view the recording later, and you can share that to learn all about this topic. It is very useful, though. Wi-Fi is certainly something we need right now. So anyway, I'm going to reprise a presentation I did last October for regional trainings we did throughout the state of Idaho called Datapalooza that covered a variety of topics, but one of those ones we covered was this Wi-Fi content filtering. So if you happen to attend one of our Datapalooza trainings in October, fantastic. This will be a bit, you will find this presentation to be almost identical, other than probably some different ad libs and stuff I put in there, hopefully. But hopefully there's still some good stuff. And if there's anything you didn't find, if you didn't attend, well, this is great. This will be new to you. But please, at any point during the presentation, feel free to interrupt with questions in the chat. I'll be keeping some eye on it, but I know Annie will, and Annie will, she's told me, gently interrupt me at any point if you have questions. So you don't have to save your questions for the end. You can just ask as you go, and we will go through it. This should be very casual. We have a nice small group today. And hopefully we'll address everything. But there will be time also at the end for questions too. So if you do want to wait till the end, that's fine. But again, you can interrupt me as much as you want. So anyway, we're going to talk about Wi-Fi content filtering. Who am I? I'm the broadband consultant. I've been at the Commission for Libraries for a little over 3 years. And what does the broadband consultant do at the Commission for Libraries? In a nutshell, I help libraries with their internet and technology. So I'm often assisting them with, yes, Annie, please.
Will you be addressing hotspot filtering?
Yes, that is definitely one of the topics we will get to. So please, and when we get to the hotspot filtering, if I don't address the specific question you have, Christopher, please feel free to just let me know what it is specifically. So, but we will get there, I promise. So anyway, I help libraries with their internet, with their broadband. Big portion of that is assisting libraries with that's access to federal and state funding, how to address these kind of state and federal laws regarding filtering and internet and all that sort of thing. So anyway, without further ado, let's hop into the presentation. I will pull up hopefully you're seeing there my first slide, Wi-Fi content filtering overview. And if you have any technical issues, again, shout those out and let's jump into it. So Wi-Fi content filtering overview. That's what we're all here for. And first off, I like to start off with a comic here, talking about Wi-Fi and the probability a house guest will be able to connect to your Wi-Fi. And I like this graph, as you could see, that you've got this whole thing of like people in the middle here have no problem connecting to Wi-Fi, but then you have the people who, if they're not very tech savvy on the left side of that graph, they can't find the Wi-Fi settings at all. And people on the right side maybe are a little too advanced and they start throwing out words that nobody knows, like firmware. So we are going, hopefully, many of you are maybe in the middle, maybe on the lower end, but what I'm hoping to do with this presentation is address a lot of the stuff that hopefully dispels. You don't need to be super tech savvy. You don't need to know firmware. We'll explain everything as we go along. And we'll figure out what we're actually talking about here with content filtering and Wi-Fi and what's necessary. All right. So first off, we're going to talk what's the law. What are we required to do, specifically also by state law? If you participate in the E-rate program, you know there's some federal law that's required too, which we could talk about. But the most important thing is that if you are an Idaho Public Library, there are certain laws that apply here. And the law in particular we're looking at is Idaho Code 33-2741. That contains the information in there about what is required for content filtering in public libraries in Idaho. So first off, this law says, and it's been around for, I think, a bit over about 10 years now. So it's been around for a while. We're talking about the existing law, not the new Wi-Fi content filtering one. We will get to that. This one specifically says that currently exists on the books is public libraries shall have a content filter in place for publicly accessible computers with internet access used by minors. So let's break that down just a little bit there because it's a blob. So first off, you need to have an internet content filter in place. For state law, it is just for your publicly accessible computers, just your public computers that have internet access that can be used by children. So a couple things that you wouldn't need content filtering for. The computer obviously it's not an internet connected computer. It's only using local resources. You don't need content filtering, obviously. You have separate computer labs, and this computer lab is just for adults. Kids don't use it at all. You don't need content filtering on there for state law. And staff computers, again, you don't need content filtering on those staff computers. It's just for publicly accessible ones. So this is all state law. Again, slightly different if you participate in the E-rate program for internet reimbursement. That requires the Children's Internet Protection Act, which is a slightly different law. But anyway, we're talking state law. This is what everybody has to do. So, okay, content filter in place, internet content filter. The other thing you need to have that state law says that we don't go over as much in this one, but just an important thing to remember, is public libraries need to have an internet safety policy in place that is reviewed every 3 years by their board. So there's some examples of those. You can go look at what other libraries are doing. There's certain requirements of what have to be in that safety policy. Once you have it in place, again, your board just needs to review it every 3 years, update it or change it if necessary. Again, just another provision of the state law. So those two things, the big components of what is required. So next, what has changed? This was, again, the law that currently exists. That's the law we're currently following. Again, if your library is not open to the public right now, you're probably not worrying about it. But when we reopen, this is what you need to care about with your public computers. So what's changed? Well, last year, 2019, about a year ago this time, House Bill 194 was introduced, and it had a couple of tweaks for what we were just going to talk about, that piece of Idaho Code when it was passed, and happy that we can talk more about that. But the specific things it amended was it added what we're talking about here, why we're here, publicly accessible wireless internet access to the content filtering requirement. So not only now will you need to have content filtering on your publicly accessible internet-connected computers that could be used by minors, you now also need it on your publicly accessible wireless internet access. And Christopher, I see you have a question here. You are correct. I guess in my previous slide, Idaho Code, you had your question about whether E-rate or something similar required a way to override a filter for a legitimate site. Yes, Idaho Code, I believe it is optional to have that override, but I believe for E-rate and precedent is you should have some way to override the filter when it is for a legal purpose and done for an adult. I'll show you where there's a little breakdown of what each of the laws require available on our website. But yes, that is a very good point and should also be addressed. And Idaho Code does pertain to that as well. So House Bill 194, in addition to adding content filtering requirements, the benefit of, not the benefit, the upside is that it's not the law right now. It's going to affect July 1st. So we have a couple of more months to deal with it. But if your library is not currently providing content filtering on your Wi-Fi, you're still fine. You're not breaking the law or anything like that. And I would argue right now at this particular time we find ourselves in, hopefully your library Wi-Fi is made available as much as possible, given that buildings are closed, schools are closed, and a lot of people have internet access issues, as many of you well know. Public libraries are often one of the few places in a community where the public can get free internet access. And so I highly recommend and would support libraries making that as available as possible, especially in this time. If a person has to drive up in their car to use the library's Wi-Fi, and if they can access it from their car in the parking lot, that's valuable, because a lot of folks may not have a quality internet connection at home, and that may be their best source right now. So anyway, but you don't have to worry about content filtering right now, so don't feel like you have to go take it. You should be thinking about it, because it's going to go into effect on July 1st if you don't have it already. So the other thing about this House bill, there's no funding included. So legislature says we're going to add this publicly accessible wireless internet access to content filter requirements, going to go into effect July 1st, but we're not providing any funding on it. So that is definitely an issue. Doing content filtering on Wi-Fi is different than, of course, filtering your publicly accessible internet computers used by minors. You're going to run into different sorts of issues. A lot of content filters for computers, you could just install the content filter directly on the computer. It's not going to work for your public wireless. So we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to figure out, how can we do this with no funding, finding other funding, and we've got some ideas for that. We'll get into those. So the next section, how do we comply with this new requirement that will be going into effect July 1st? Since it's something we'll have to think about. So let's talk about that. So I did a survey of public libraries last year. It was about this time last year. I think I ran it from about April through September of 2019, of what libraries were currently doing in terms of if they were providing content filtering on their Wi-Fi. Again, wasn't required at the time, just curious who was already doing it. And so I asked all the public libraries in the state to respond to this very short survey to find out, because we just didn't have a lot of good data on who was content filtering. So I got 85% of Idaho public libraries to answer this little short survey. So that was pretty good turnout. And of this survey, again, from April to September of last year, so it's a little out of date. Libraries, things could have changed since then. 61.5% of those said at that time they were already filtering their Wi-Fi. So that was 61.5% of those that responded said they were already filtering at that time. Again, they could have responded as early as April of last year. This information could be as much as a year out of date. So obviously there could be more that are filtering their Wi-Fi now, but that's what we had at the time. When you're doing the crunching of numbers about how many public libraries are in the state, those who responded, and who said they were at the time, that meant that at least 35 were going to need to address the new requirement by July of 2020, which is one of the reasons we're here. So how do we address that content filtering? So that is what the results of my survey said. That's what we've got to figure out here, is how to get these libraries, if they want to comply by July 1st. Well, a couple options for how to comply with it, again, with no funding, or what are our options right off the bat. First off the bat, we have my least favorite option, the no Wi-Fi option. So to comply, the library could just stop providing publicly accessible internet access, because if you don't have publicly accessible internet access, if you don't have public Wi-Fi, then you don't have to filter it. You're in compliance with the law. But it's not a great solution, and hopefully everybody understands that. Not providing public Wi-Fi, when we were just talking about how libraries are one of the sources in a community for that free internet, and now more than ever is a crucial service. I really hope people don't have to go this route. And if you're really thinking you're going to go this route, again, please feel free to talk to me, and we'll figure something out. And we have some more solutions coming. So again, hopefully no one feels like they have to go this way. But that is, again, one way to comply with the laws, just to say, fine, we won't do it, but let's not do that. So second option, limit the public Wi-Fi access to adults. So this one's a little fuzzy. This is a little gray area, but the law specifically says where it's amended in there. You remember it said publicly accessible computers, internet can be used by minors. Well, it slots in that publicly accessible wireless right there too. So it's worded in such a way that you could look at it and say, well, if my public Wi-Fi is not available to minors, just like with the public accessible computers, then I don't have to filter it. So there's kind of a way to get around. So you could kind of go around that. Now, how are you going to make sure that only adults are using your Wi-Fi? I mean, I guess the most simple, straightforward way would put a password on your Wi-Fi, only provide that password to adults, and then hope that and then you're saying, well, we're just providing it to adults. I mean, the password's probably going to get out elsewhere, but um, you're intending that this Wi-Fi only to be used by adults. So that might be a way to go. I don't think it's a great way to go, though. Again, just because you have to add another barrier to people to get onto your public Wi-Fi, they have to get a password somehow. You only can provide it to adults. At this time, when a lot of people are trying to school from home because the schools are closed, I don't know if you want to add that extra barrier in there. So again, I don't think that's a great solution either. Better than totally completely shutting off your Wi-Fi, but I don't think it's a great option either. So, of course, the last option that I can think of is just to add some content filtering to your Wi-Fi, which is hopefully what you're here for, and what we're going to go over a couple ideas for that. So you add content filtering to your publicly accessible wireless internet access, and then you're in compliance with the law. So how do we do that? How do we add content filtering to our Wi-Fi? And again, this will be kind of a broad, high level stuff, but I'm going to give you some ideas. So the problem is we talked that there's no funding. And stay tuned for the end of this presentation because I'm going to give you a little tip that some of this has changed since October, and maybe there is some options for that. But let's go for right now that you have no funding and you don't want something super difficult because maybe you don't have a lot of technical support staff at your library, and you got to figure something out, and you don't have the money, and you don't have you don't have a technical staff person to do it for you. What's a way you can just do this, address this issue, be in compliance with the law, and move on with your life? So what I've identified here is something that is available free for libraries to use and does address the law. There are limitations, we'll go over those, but it would at least address the law, and hopefully you can set it up in a way that is not too difficult and not too challenging if you don't have technical support staff. But before we go into it, I have to talk about some different ways that you can do content filtering on your Wi-Fi. So we're going to talk about something first. We're going to a little techie. What is DNS? So we got to talk about DNS real quick. I'm going to try and make this as easy to approach as possible if you haven't heard of DNS before. So DNS is the domain name system, domain naming system. It is one of the backbones of the internet as we know it. So it is when we want to go to a website like libraries.idaho.gov or Google, we type in an address, and that address is something that we humans we can recognize. It's words, it's libraries.idaho.gov, or it's a string of letters, or it's a made up, thing. But computers don't do as well with that. They need numbers. They need something specific. So what DNS is, it's kind of like the address book of the internet. You all remember like the yellow pages? Obviously, those are not as prevalent these days. But how do you look up what? But the DNS is what basically is the phone book for the internet. So when you type in libraries.idaho.gov, DNS is the system, the service that translates you typing in libraries.idaho.gov and translates it into the actual numerical address of where the Idaho Commission for Libraries website is located on the internet. It turns it into the number, the IP address. You may have heard those internet protocol addresses, and get you there, all while you're just thinking, I'm typing in libraries.idaho.gov. We don't normally have to think about it because your internet provider provides you with DNS built in. It's just a built-in system. If you're using Sparklight, if you're using CenturyLink, if you're using any internet provider, you get this built in. It's using the built-in DNS, the phone book, and it takes you there. Now, if you are but you don't have to use the built-in one. And that's the sneaky thing we're going to talk about. How one of the ways to do content filtering is you can change which, just like you could get a different phone book if you don't want to use the yellow pages, or you want to go, use a different phone book of some other variety. You can change your DNS settings. You can go and use a different way to look up internet addresses if you manually go in and want to change it. And how this works for content filtering is if you pick a content filter that works over DNS, it's like picking a phone book with anything that's filtered out, those pages are gone. So it just doesn't know how to look them up. So if you type in something that the content filter isn't trying to filter out or trying to block, it just won't be found. It will, you'll type in, I don't know, some obscenewebsite.com, and if that's part of what the content filtering is trying to block out, then it just doesn't find it. It can't. It doesn't know where to go, so you don't get there. So you change your DNS settings to use this different DNS system, and then anything that is not in that DNS system just won't be found. So that's another way to do content filtering. And different content filters provide these different DNSs you can use to control what can be looked up. And that's another way to do content filtering. And the beauty of this is that it works with your Wi-Fi, with your public Wi-Fi, because you can just change those settings on your Wi-Fi device or for your whole network if you want to get this for your publicly accessible computers as well. And then anything that connects to that Wi-Fi or anything that connects to the network, wherever you change those DNS settings, they're all using that same DNS, and they will also be prevented from going where the content filter doesn't know where to go. So hopefully that helps a little bit. If you have more questions about DNS, happy to further explain. But what I'm identifying here is there are some paid DNS filters, and there are some free ones. The free one that I've identified so far here is one that's called Clean Browsing. They've been around for several months now. They've been around for a few months in October when I first did this presentation, and they are a DNS filter provider, and they offer both a free and a paid service for doing DNS content filtering. The free service completely can comply with the law, at least as I see it. There are limitations because the things you get for the paid service is you can more specifically say, here's what I want to include and here's what I want to exclude. You can get a little bit more stats about how often it's being accessed. The free version is pretty much just a set it up, forget it's there, except when you might need to bypass it or get around it. When you have a legitimate thing where you need to go override the filter for a legitimate site. So the free service, though, will address the law, won't cost you anything. And the other reason I really like Clean Browsing is that of the free ones out there, they specifically say, a lot of the free ones will say that they're more just designed for personal use. You go use it at your home or something like that. They're a little shady on whether they're a little iffy on whether they want a business to use or an organization to use the free version. Clean Browsing specifically calls out they are fine with businesses, libraries, organizations using just the free service. So I have no qualms about promoting it because I don't feel like it's going to be shut off on you or that you're going to be violating a terms of service. The other thing I really like about Clean Browsing, and we can look at it after I get through these slides, is they provide guides for like almost every kind of device you could think of. Your Wi-Fi access points, your routers, your computers, how to set it up on the device. And they provide step-by-step instructions. So if you don't have IT staff or technical staff that can, if you're trying to puzzle through it, their step-by-step guides really help you access where you need to go change the DNS settings, what you need to go do. So I really like them for that too. Obviously, I can try and help you with that too, but I just like that they have really broken out every single type of device you might imagine, setup guides. So we can look more at them, but that is the number one that I've just recommended in terms of you need a free solution that will address the law and hopefully won't be too difficult to set up, this you can go do, wipe your hands, install it, and you can kind of forget about it. Um, that is the immediate solution. Now, what about some other ideas beyond clean browsing? We have what about other content filters here? Some other alternatives you might want to investigate. Um, if you have some funding or there's some other options, some things I'll talk about later. Um, so first off, other content filtering solutions. We have a guide on the Commission for Libraries website, more about content filtering requirements, state and federal, as well as a list of a variety of content filters that I've kind of looked into, put links to, tried to gather some general pricing for. So that is available from our website in the broadband section under technology guides. Um, Hopefully that's another resource for you to go to take a look at. And that also will help you find out what do I specifically need to do for what the law says, and some FAQs, various other ideas for content filtering that products you can use, you can test out. Highly recommend looking at that as a good starting point. And obviously, if you have more questions beyond that, I'm happy to further address. Or if there's something on there that you think that I haven't put on there yet, feel free to put them on. We're not endorsing any of these necessarily, but we are just kind of presenting in the menu of choices for you to look at. In addition to that, you could ask your internet provider if they provide content filtering. Now, not all do, maybe only a few of them actually do, but some internet providers will provide content filtering as an additional service. Um, Now, if you do E-rate, the important thing to note with E-rate is E-rate requires content filtering, but it will not cover content filtering costs. So if your internet provider provides content filtering, you can't, and you also do E-rate, the content filter is going to be a separate line charge, and E-rate won't cover that for you. But it's still a good option, and some internet providers are pretty wise to that. For example, one of the internet providers in Idaho that serves many parts of the state. Yes, Annie, please.
We have a question in the chat. Isn't it true that DNS filtering can be easily bypassed? And also, are libraries liable if a patron does bypass a DNS filter?
Ooh, good questions. Thank you. Yeah, that's very good. Um, so yes, like many content filters, they can be easily bypassed. I think especially, I would say, more so if a patron controls the device, they're connecting to your wireless. Might be a little harder for them to bypass them using them on a on a library-owned computer because you've got it maybe locked down in other ways. But if they're using their own smartphone, tablet, laptop, whatever, to access the library's wireless, they can bypass those by putting in their own DNS settings. Just like you change the DNS settings, they can say, no, I want to go use these DNS settings, which then will not use your filter. So yes, they are potentially, with someone who has at least a little bit of know-how, not too difficult to bypass a DNS filter, especially on a personal owned device. Now, is the library liable if a patron bypasses it? I don't think so. Not the way the law is worded. The library is making its effort to provide content filtering on where it's required, and that is, I believe, enough to satisfy what the law wants the library to do. Now, obviously, if your community, if your board wants more stringent, wants to make sure that the content filtering is not going to be bypassed, then maybe the DNS filter isn't the way to go. You're going to have to look at some more savvy content filtering for your Wi-Fi, things that sometimes public schools and other things look into, but that require a more robust and potentially more expensive solution. But if you're just trying to address the law, and if your community and board is okay with savvy folks being able to know that they could get around your content filter, especially if they control the device and they're able to change the settings on their device, then yeah, that's kind of where we're at. But that's a great question, and definitely something to consider as you're weighing the pros and cons of the various types of content filtering out there. So back to the asking your internet provider. So the one thing I was just going to finish up with that is there's an internet provider that serves some parts of the state. Obviously, not all every internet provider serves every part of our state, but if you're in one of them that does that I know of, for example, if you have Tech Hut, Tech Hut is an internet provider that serves some parts of the state, and just one of their features that they offer, not an endorsement again of them, just in providing information, is that libraries that use them in schools, Tech Hut will provide their content filtering for $1 a month for their content filtering when you're using them as an internet provider. So if you're an E-rate customer, that works out pretty well for you in the sense that E-rate's covering the internet connection and you're just paying the $1 a month for content filtering, and it's done by your internet provider. You adjust it as necessary. The libraries I've talked to that have Tech Hut that do this like it just fine. So something to keep in mind. You can talk to your net provider if you just want to see if they can handle it for you, and see what their options are. How customizable it is, how easy is it to bypass? How, when you need to unfilter something, look into that. Another option to look at when you're considering content filtering is considering a managed solution. So some companies will offer you a managed solution where they'll set up, configure, and maintain that content filter for you. Because the big difference with the managed solutions is just that you're paying someone else to manage it for you. So you don't have to dive into the settings or dashboard or control panel as much. They are controlling it for you. So they tend to be a little more expensive, but but it lets someone else take care of the work for you, basically, so you don't have to try and figure it out. So one example of that with a managed solution is, this is just one example. I'm not, again, endorsing or anything like that. I just want to provide some price points as people are looking at various options. We got this pricing a little while ago for one particular managed solution. They just sent it to me in Dedix. They're a company here in Idaho. They provide a managed solution to take care of your content filtering, internet security, and this was some example pricing they provided us with. So on the left, if you can kind of see it in the light blue, there is the number of, the pricing is based on the number of your full-time equivalent staff. So if you have less than 2 full-time equivalent staff at your library, for the managed solution would be about $2,000 a year, or you could buy 3 years worth for about $3,000. And it scales up from there. Just another thing to consider. You could potentially negotiate different pricing than that, but that's just another thing to file away. Again, a managed solution, they're going to take care of a lot of things for you. That's just kind of what's bundled into the price. So that's a lot about content filtering and Wi-Fi, some various ideas, some thoughts to go look at. We can dive into a couple of those other things like clean browsing site and the technology guide here after I get through the rest of the slides. But I know there's already a question about it, and it's a question on many people's minds. What about mobile hotspots? What about mobile hotspots, and how is this affected by the legislation? So when we're talking about mobile hotspots, these are the devices that some libraries in the state and elsewhere are checking out. They're things like MiFis, generally more known as mobile hotspots. They're little devices that use a cellular signal. They connect to a cell network to create a wireless hotspot, basically. So you can create internet wherever you can get a cell signal. A lot of libraries are checking those out, providing patrons with them. Super great, super useful, especially during this time when a lot of people are, needing that internet connectivity, and maybe they can't get somewhere for it. I mean, obviously, you have to figure out a way to circulate them, but they've been incredibly popular in the libraries that have them. We have a list of the libraries that we know of in Idaho that have them, but there are. But how are they affected by this legislation? Because they're creating a wireless network of sorts. Now, again, they're being checked out. And they create a small wireless network based on the cell network. But how are they affected by this legislation? Well, we had that same question, and we had lots of questions from libraries when this legislation was first passed. And all I can tell you is, here's the advice we got. We passed that up to our Deputy Attorney General, and we asked them, all right, here's the legislation. Here's what mobile hotspots are. Here's what libraries are doing. And our Deputy Attorney General, they're paid, they're a lawyer. They're going to give you what the safest answer is, the one that avoids the most trouble. And so the advice they gave us was that the safe answer is assume, because they're not specifically called out in the law, but because they can create a publicly accessible wireless um, network potentially, that it's the safest to assume is that mobile hotspots do fall under this law and therefore should have content filtering. Now, again, this was just the opinion of our Deputy Attorney General. It's it can be interpreted. They did say its possibilities that it could be interpreted other ways. And so you may, if your library has its own legal counsel, you may wish to investigate that um, before proceeding with adding circulating hotspots, or if you already have them, figuring out what you're going to need to do. It is worth maybe looking into. I can only tell you what we were told, um, but it's not specifically written into the law. So what do you do about your mobile hotspots? A little bit different than doing a wireless network that's in your library, because mobile hotspots, you don't not only have the same kind of control over that you do with a wireless access point in your building, because mobile hotspots, because they're run by the cellular networks, they don't let you go in and just change the DNS settings on those usually. They are because they don't let you change those, because the cell providers have to kind of optimize the limited bandwidth, the limited capabilities of these devices. They don't want you just going in and changing the DNS to something beyond what they have. So you can't just do the clean browsing or some of the other approaches. So how can you comply, assuming you're going to say, well, first thing, like we said, you consult your legal counsel, decide, yes, how do we feel? Are we just going to proceed with this? Are we going to assume that these do need to be filtered or not? Check with your legal counsel. Assuming you are going to go forward with that, and you decide we need to do something about these mobile hotspots and we should filter them to be in full, safe compliance with the law, is mobile hotspot providers. Some of them can add content filtering to their devices. So some of the popular ones like Mobile Beacon, Sprint, T-Mobile, they all provide free content filtering on their hotspots. You can call them up. Again, the only downside with that, and it's not a huge, is that it's, I think you call them up, you set it up, and then you don't have, I don't think there's a whole lot of control in terms of, if a patron checks out a mobile hotspot, tries to access a website and it's blocked and it shouldn't be blocked. I think from what I understand, it's difficult to unblock sites on the fly. So that's the other issue with, of course, the content filtering on mobile hotspots, is that you're going to be limited in terms of what you can unfilter on the fly. But again, these all provide free content filtering on the mobile hotspots. It's just an option. You ask for it, they provide it. The other option that I've heard of is just limiting circulation of your mobile hotspots to just adults. Again, as the legislation was worded, we're looking at things particularly accessed by minors. So if your mobile hotspot is only circulated to adults, the law doesn't require you to provide content filtering on that. So that could be one way to address it. Now, of course, we know that, adult checks it out and children uses it. Well, then it's on the adult who checked it out. It's no longer the library's concern or responsibility. So that's another way. Some libraries are already just checking them out, mobile hotspots only to adults, to just out of a caution, because these are more expensive devices, and wanting to control who checks those out a little bit. So just another thing to keep in mind with mobile hotspots, how to deal with complying with the law, how to get this figured out. So what else, where else can we go to get help on this topic? I'm just going to throw out some additional resource support, including one that's going to be very brand new. It's not quite there yet. We have, first off, we have a program. We've had it for quite a while, since October of 2018, called BTIP, the Broadband Toolkit Improvement Program. If your library hasn't participated in this yet, I highly recommend it. Not just because I run the program, but because it's a chance for you to get $500 for your library to improve some technology, broadband items at your library, entirely what you decide. there's information on our website about this broadband toolkit. It's a toolkit you fill out, you go through it, steps you through it. It explains everything, and I can help you out with it if you need it. Of helping you understand the broadband and technology already in your library. It helps you identify items that you might want to address, and then you get that $500, and you can apply that towards the items you want to address from it. It's just kind of like a mini grant. So that's still available. You can definitely sign up for that. I would highly encourage you just to understand more about, just creates a great document to have to understand your library's technology. Had several libraries go through it. You can see which libraries have gone through it on our webpage. Other resources to consider: E-rate. If you're already doing E-rate, great. If you're not, definitely another option to consider. It's a little too late to get in for this E-rate year now. E-rate runs on a yearly cycle, and we're nearing the deadline for libraries to apply for this year, but they would have had to go through a open bidding process, and that we've already run out of time for that. So if you're interested in E-rate and you did get it on earlier this year, you can start be thinking about it for next year. And E-rate won't pay for your content filtering, as I alluded to before, but E-rate does, you know, can pay for your internet connection, combined when we have a state program, so you get your internet connection fully covered between E-rate and the state program. And E-rate also has a pool of funds for every library and school called Category 2, and that can help you purchase maintenance and funding for network hardware that, although it won't pay for the content filtering, if you need to get a device, like a piece of hardware that you want to do the content filtering from like a Sonic Wall or a Barracuda or some other device on your network, E-rate's content filtering can help pay for that. So again, something to keep in mind. Might be a little further out there. It's not going to help you address immediately the July 1st requirement, but happy to help with that. And of course, I'm a resource. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. My stuff is on the website to contact me, and I'm happy to help on any kind of library technology or broadband issue. So I think that's pretty much it for the slides, but I wanted to give a little preview of something else that I didn't get into the slides because it's still coming soon, like hopefully later this week. But for those of you here, you'll get a little sneak peek at it. So let me exit out here of the slide deck for a moment. So, and we can look at the other things like clean browsing and stuff in a moment. But what I wanted to bring up is we are putting the touches on a reimbursement program for libraries for content filtering and potentially mobile hotspots. So again, I said earlier, there was no funding attached to this legislation. Libraries were just expected to do it on their own. It didn't sit well with us at the commission. For libraries, we wanted to find some way to assist libraries with that. Last August, we were looking at asking for additional money in our budget to be able to reimburse libraries or purchase a statewide managed solution. Unfortunately, we were halted last August when the governor said, no, state agencies, you can't go ask for any more enhancements this upcoming budget year. So we weren't able to proceed with that. But what we are doing now is we are looking at, we have some end of year funds coming up. Our state fiscal year ends here at the end of June, and we're having some money left in our budget from trainings we've had to cancel, travel we've had to cancel. And one of the ways we want to apply it is creating a source of funding for libraries to get reimbursed for their content filtering that they've put in place in the past year, since last July. So this form, I'm putting the finishing touches on now, should go later this week. Any Idaho Public Library, whether you participate in E-rate or not, will be able to apply for reimbursement for their content filtering that's existing, or if you needed to add new for your Wi-Fi content filtering, and that required, anything like installation, license agreements. That's going to be, hopefully, I'm going to put this up later this week, and it's going to be a pretty short time frame because we got to use these up before the end of the year. This is where we're getting this funding from. It's just extra commission for libraries funds that we didn't use otherwise this year. So we will keep this open until Wednesday, May 13th after it goes up. And it's pretty, I'll scroll real quick. You just select what library you're for, put your contact information. You have to give us a W-9 for your library if we don't already have one. And then you just need to send us your invoices for your content filtering. And so whatever you did for your content filtering, that's our number one priority. If we have additional funding left over after all the libraries apply that have their content filtering, you can also put in here any circulating mobile hotspots invoices you had for the past year. So if you've purchased some more hotspots to check out, because those are very crucial in these days, you can also put those in there. And if we have additional funds left after reimbursing libraries for their content filtering, we will then try to also reimburse libraries for the mobile hotspots they're circulating. And that's pretty much the form. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to hopefully put it out, announce it later this week in all the various channels. But I just wanted to say this is your sneak peek, the wide sneak peek of getting to see that there will be some reimbursement funding available, and we're going to make that available. And there'll be a short time frame to apply for it, but hopefully libraries are going to be able to take advantage of that. And with that, I guess I will look to the chat and see if anyone here has any questions about that whole. I kind of sped through a lot of that presentation, but we have a lot of time. We have some time left. If there's any questions, comments, suggestions, anything that you wanted me to cover that wasn't covered here, and again, if I went real fast through this, there will be a recording available, hopefully within a week's time of this presentation that you can use again later. So I thank you for attending. I'm just going to hang out for questions for a little bit. We'll see if anybody has anything. Great question, Christopher. Cap on that funding. We're still figuring out how much end of year funding we have, so I hate to be so dodgy about it, but we are, that's why we're asking for all these requests and only giving till May 13th, because we're going to see what all the requests are and then try to match the amount of end of year funding we can get towards it. Yes, at least $2. yes, we have at least $10,000 at least in our leftover state broadband reimbursement funds. So I know we have at least 10,000, and I've heard probably maybe 20, 30,000 possibly in other end of year funds, but I know they're still kind of working that out with our fiscal folks. But we're hoping we're going to be able to get, even if we can't fully 100% reimburse everybody that submits something will get something, and hopefully something is better than nothing in this case. And hopefully we can do a lot more than just something. So, great question. Other comments, questions? I'm going to click over quickly to that clean browsing, just so you can see that cleanbrowsing.org. Pretty straightforward website. Here's the free ones they have here. If you can see in the middle of my page, they have 3 different free options. Again, the limitations of it being free is it's not really customizable. So they have a security filter, which is not going to really do enough for you by state law. It's just blocking phishing and malware. The adult filter will, oh, Randy, I see your question. I'll get to it just a sec. The adult filter is probably what you will want if you want to do this clean browsing option. It's going to block your adult domains, which is, I guess I should have hit that earlier in my presentation, but that's specifically what Idaho law wants, is the content filtering. They want it to be blocking obscene or objectionable material. So think adult content. So, Randy, your question. So other libraries and nations Wi-Fi filtering their successes, lessons learned. Yeah, it's interesting. Thinking about what other libraries throughout the country have faced in terms of their Wi-Fi filtering. I am not super familiar with other libraries that have a state law like Idaho does for requiring content filtering. I've had a couple other state libraries contact me about the list I've put together and the resources I've put together, just as they're trying to prepare their own resources, but not out of any kind of requirement. So trying to address, I'm trying to think of any other examples of other libraries that have dealt with it in a lot of ways. It's still a pretty brand new space, I think, for some libraries to deal with. Um, and I'm trying to think of anything else that I can share in terms of what folks have done with it. Yeah, it is. It's pretty new. Frankly, it's hit or miss. You know, the ability to provide content filtering on someone's personal device that you don't have control over um, is difficult. And that and requires a different approach. And yeah, so I wish I would have heard from other states, but again, I don't. From all that I've heard so far, I have not heard of any other state having this kind of requirement yet. And I'm I feel like it's unfortunate that the timing is very awkward in the sense that the timing we're in right now. I mean, this has always been a crucial service of libraries providing public Wi-Fi for folks, but particularly in this particular spot we are in now, and it's a disappointment that the date effective date wasn't pushed further past July 1st, 2020, in this most recent legislative session, or that some funding wasn't found for it. I think both those things were at least somewhat looked at by the legislature, but not very far, and didn't go that. So um, it is what it is. Other comments or questions, those folks? Hopefully you got something out of this. This was valuable. I know I didn't have John Krasinski or Lin-Manuel Miranda here or anyone else, but hopefully we made this topic as engaging as it possibly could be. And I do appreciate you all showing up and thinking about this. And I'm happy to share further information, work with people independently, and Christopher, yeah, please feel free to reach out to me um, directly if you like. If you have additional questions, um, happy to work with you. So,
Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I am going to stop the recording now.